Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar series, Training the Next Generation of Wheat Scientists. In our webinar series today, we'll have Dr. Mithila from Kansas State University. She's gonna talk about the application of molecular cytogenetics in wheat science. Mithila, thank you very much for your willingness to give this talk and to answer our invitation. And I will handle the screen to you and you can start your presentation. Thank you very much.
Sure. All right. Greetings everyone from Kansas. I know we have folks from different part of the world. I don't know it's morning or evening. Everybody, thank you so much for joining. And first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Avila for giving me this opportunity. This is really a cool way of keeping your student engaged. I know it involves a lot of work from your side, Louis, but I believe this is really a nice thing for students to get engaged during this time of unprecedented times in our education system. Anyway, I'm going to give an overview of one of the kind of new area, at least in wheat science, which is molecular cytogenetics area, which has been used by biologists for a long time. Just in wheat science, this area has been exploited more recently. I'm just looking, I'm going to give an overview how we could take advantage of this area of investigation for understanding evolution of herbicide resistance in wheat. So here is an outline of my seminar today. I'm going to give a brief overview on evolution of herbicide resistance in wheat. And then I'll also give some basic information on mechanisms of herbicide resistance in wheat, and spend some time on gene amplification based resistance to herbicides, specifically for glyphosate. And then I'll talk about how the molecular cytogenetics can be applied to investigate the origin of gene amplification in glyphosate resistant wheats. Taking them as an example, I'm going to talk about some of the basic information related to evolution of gene amplification based resistance in these wheats. Finally, I'll summarize and give some significance of molecular cytogenetics application in wheat science. So I'm sure most of you or the students in this class are very well aware that herbicide resistance evolution is a naturally occurring phenomenon. And this evolution occurs as a consequence of herbicide selection. It's basically repeated or continuous use of same mode of action of herbicide results in evolution of herbicide resistant wheat. Basically, in this picture, I just show in the natural population, there are always some individuals that have traits that can help them tolerate herbicide application. So once these population exposed to the same mode of action of herbicide, those that have these characteristics to survive herbicide would multiply in the subsequent season, because they survive, reproduce, and then you will have more plants that have resistance to that particular herbicide in the next season. And also subsequently you see even more plants showing resistance in the population. You are basically reducing the susceptible plants. This is how the evolution of herbicide resistance occurs in nature. But as a result of extensive selection everywhere around the globe, we have seen incidence of herbicide resistance wheat increasing steadily. I have here a map showing the increase in number of cases of herbicide resistant wheats in the US in the last 2 decades. as you can see, there was a steep increase in number of weeds that are resistant to herbicide. This is as such the unique cases of herbicide resistance in weeds. And here I have got a map where, again, map of US, where we have the number of cases of herbicide resistant weeds documented. The darker the blue color is that represent the more number of cases. If you look at the international survey of weed herbicide resistant in weeds, actually the California state ranked first with about 30 unique cases of herbicide resistant weeds. And here is Kansas right in the middle. We have got 28 cases, the same as Illinois, where the number of cases are again 28. So in Kansas, for us, the most problem weeds are Pomeranth, Acacia, common water hemp, horseweed, and sunflower. I believe horseweed Coniza canadensis is also a problem weed in Brazil as well, and you have herbicide resistance in weeds documented across your country as well. So some of the known mechanisms of herbicide resistance in weeds have been grouped actually into two types. One is non-target site resistance. I believe Dr. Nilda Burgos has given a wonderful webinar on this topic not too long ago for your class. Basically, non-target site resistance evolution can occur either as a result of reduced herbicide absorption or translocation of herbicide after absorption, leading to limited herbicide dose reaching the target. Therefore, the plant would serve a herbicide application. But on the other hand, most common or most predominant non-target site resistance in weeds has been because of herbicide metabolism. Basically, the herbicide is detoxified into non-active or non-toxic compounds, and thereby the plant can survive the herbicide application. So as the name implies here, any mechanism that results in reduced amount of herbicide reaching the target site. Basically, the target is still active or it is still sensitive to the herbicide when you have non-target site resistant mechanism. In the target site resistant mechanism, which is the another group of herbicide resistant mechanisms that have been known so far, primarily the target site resistance results because of alterations in the herbicide target gene. Basically, you can have a single nucleotide change resulting in certain amino acid substitutions, thereby the protein that is the target for herbicide is modified, and the herbicide can no longer bind to the protein, resulting in herbicide resistance. Some other mechanisms of target site resistance that have been known more recently include gene amplification, where it is basically the herbicide target or the molecular target gene of the herbicide is duplicated or amplified several fold, thereby the plant can have more enzyme, that is the herbicide target, available. So even when a plant receives the field recommended dose of herbicide, there was enough enzyme available for the plant to function normally. Sometimes you can also have increased target gene expression conferring herbicide resistance. It can occur as a result of amplification of the gene, thereby increased expression of the gene, or sometimes without gene amplification also, you will have an increased gene expression conferring herbicide resistance. So for today's discussion, like I said, I'm going to focus on gene amplification based target site resistance in weed species. So gene amplification based resistance to herbicides in weeds, I'm sure many of you must have read classic paper by Dr. Todd Gaines and others, which was published in PNAS in 2010. That was first reported in palm amaranth for the herbicide glyphosate. Subsequently, in many dicot and monocot weeds, gene amplification based resistance to herbicide glyphosate has been documented. But more recently, such resistance has also been documented for ACCase inhibitors by Dr. LaForest from Canada. They actually got a population of large crabgrass from Ontario, Canada, exhibiting amplification of ACCase gene, the target site of ACCase inhibitors, resulting in herbicide resistance. They haven't seen any mutations in the ACCase gene or any non-target site resistance. Essentially, the resistance is because of amplification of ACCase gene. So in my lab, we are working with that population also, although I'm not going to talk about that part, but hopefully sometime soon we can share the results of that research as well. So today I'm going to give case studies of gene amplification based resistance to glyphosate in different weeds. Again, I'm going to briefly talk about mode of action of glyphosate. I'm sure many of you in this group aware of how actually glyphosate kills the plants. Basically, glyphosate has a target site in shikimic acid pathway, which is an important biochemical pathway for plants for production of aromatic amino acids such as phenylalanine, tyrosine, and tryptophan. So the enzyme enol pyruvyl shikimate 3 phosphate, in short EPSPS, is the target for glyphosate. When glyphosate is applied to the plant, it competitively inhibits this enzyme, EPSPS, thereby the production of aromatic amino acids are inhibited. Therefore, the plant cannot function normally and eventually dies. So as a result of extensive or sometimes exclusive use of glyphosate, a number of weeds have evolved resistance to glyphosate. I just listed a few here, such as kochia, common waterhemp, palm amaranth, rigid ryegrass, Italian ryegrass, horseweed, and barnyard grass. So these are some really driver weeds we call here in the US that make the management decisions for growers, and they have all evolved resistance to glyphosate here across the US. So if you look in the literature, the known mechanisms of weed resistance to glyphosate include both target site and non-target site mechanisms. For non-target site resistance to glyphosate, we have seen cases where reduced translocation or vacuolar sequestration, such as in Lolium rigidum and Conyza canadensis, and Amaranthus tuberculatus, common waterhemp. These mechanisms have been documented. But more recently, Dr. Steve Paul's group from Australia, they show a clear evidence for metabolism-based resistance in Echinoclova colonna. Basically, they have identified an enzyme called aldoketoreductase, which is involved in metabolism of glyphosate, thereby these plants surviving glyphosate application. This is really a novel finding that came out last year. So in terms of target site resistance evolution to glyphosate, as I said, single nucleotide polymorphisms have been seen in the EPSPS gene. Several substitutions have been documented in different weeds. And that was the main mechanism in many glyphosate resistant weeds until the gene amplification based resistance was uncovered in 2010 in palm amaranth. Later on in many dicot and monocot weeds also gene amplification based resistance has been reported. But in POA ANVA, recently they have seen both gene amplification based as well as mutation in EPSPS gene conferring resistance to glyphosate. So again, I'm going to talk about the um, EPSPS amplification-based resistance to glyphosate in some dicot wheats today. So if you look at the reports in dicots, EPSPS amplification has been prevalent for palm amaranth resistance to glyphosate, and also it's been reported in Amaranthus spinosus, which is spiny amaranth, and Amaranthus tuberculatus, which is common water hemp, and also Basia scoparia. It should be earlier this weed, Kochia, the Latin name was Kochia scoparia. More recently, it's been the genus is changed to Basia scoparia. I'm sorry for the typo. It should be B scoparia. And in monocot wheats, we have Lolium multiflorum, which is Italian ryegrass, and Bromus diandrus, Chloris truncata. These are some of the monocot wheats that have shown gene amplification based resistance to glyphosate. So if you look at this slide, you can see clearly the number of copies of EPSPS gene is different in these wheat species. And again, the number of copies that a wheat biotype needs to withstand field application or field dose of glyphosate is different in different wheats. That might also have some influence on the mechanism of evolution of gene amplification based resistance to glyphosate. So basically, what do we mean by gene amplification? Basically, gene amplification is an increase in copy number of a restricted region in the chromosome, and it's been very well documented that gene amplification of certain genes in organisms provide genetic diversity. Basically, that kind of genetic diversity will help the organisms to have some adaptive advantage to survive under different environmental conditions as well. And gene amplification conferring resistance to xenobiotics such as pesticides, including herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides has been even some of the cancerous drugs has been documented in many organisms, like I said, in mammals for cancerous drugs. We have seen gene amplification based resistance for certain chemicals. So in terms of pesticide resistance, in aphids, insecticide such as organophosphate insecticide, they have seen the gene amplification based resistance to some chemicals. And today we are going to focus on herbicide resistance. Like I said, so far we have cases of glyphosate and ACCase inhibitor resistance conferred by gene amplification. But again, if you see a commentary written by Dr. Pat Tranel after the publication of ACCase inhibitor resistance via gene amplification in large crabgrass, essentially, Dr. Tranel suggests that wheat scientists should look for gene amplification based resistance for other herbicides and in other wheats also. It may be happening naturally for several chemicals in several wheats. So maybe that should be taken into consideration while investigating the evolution of resistance in wheat species. So how would actually the mechanisms, how would the gene amplification occur in nature? These are some of the mechanisms by which organisms evolve gene amplification based resistance. So one common mechanism is unequal crossover. I'm sure many of you learned about this in your basic biology classes in high school. Basically, unequal crossover occurs when two homologous chromosomes are misaligned. They do not align perfectly, they misalign. Thereby, there is some unequal crossing over occurs between the chromatids of the chromosome, and after the crossover during meiosis, what happens is you'll have one chromatid with a duplicate copy of the gene, whereas the other one will have a deletion of that particular gene. So subsequent meiotic events will increase the number of copies of the gene, and thereby you see increase in gene copy number. So this is one mechanism by which you see duplication of genes occurring. Or you can also have RNA mediated gene amplification. Basically, RNA is spliced and you see the reverse transcription resulting in cDNA formation, and the cDNA can randomly get integrated into different parts of the chromosome, not necessarily on the native locus where you see the original gene. So you can have the increased copy number eventually in the genome. And you can also have DNA mediated or transposon mediated amplification because of modifications, or the DNA amplified because of the activity of transposons. And you will also see increase in gene copy number because of entire chromosome duplication. Basically, and one chromosome in the organism or in the genome of an organism can duplicate, thereby you have more copies of the gene. Or as you see in polyploid, entire genome can get duplicated and you will have more copies of a particular gene. Another mechanism that is well known for having gene amplification in organisms is extra chromosomal mediated, which is basically some chromosomal aberration result in the formation of either a circular DNA molecule or a circular chromosome containing the gene, and these ones can autonomously replicate and increase in numbers, thereby the extra chromosomal segment carrying genes can also increase in number. So these are some of the known mechanisms that confer gene amplification in organisms. As far as herbicide resistance, or more so for glyphosate resistance, we have seen cases where unequal crossover contributing to the glyphosate resistance, or even transposon mediated, or role of transposon in helping the gene amplification via unequal crossover, and also extra chromosomal DNA based gene amplification. So in order to assess how we see or assess the gene amplification based resistance to herbicides, there are several techniques that we can use. You could use Southern blotting, or you could use a quantitative polymerase chain reaction, qPCR, which is basically the quantification of copy numbers relative to a reference gene, and also we compare that to a susceptible biotype as well. And you could also use one technique called fluorescent in situ hybridization, in short called FISH analysis. Basically using FISH analysis, which is one of molecular cytogenetics technique, widely used one. You could directly map the amplified copies on the chromosome. Basically, you can physically see where exactly the amplified copies of your target gene is present on the chromosome. And you could also develop high resolution maps using another molecular cytogenetic technique called FiberFISH. In FiberFISH, essentially a DNA segment is stretched on a slide, and then you use the gene of interest. In our case, we used EPSPS gene as a probe to hybridize on the DNA segment and see where exactly the hybridization signals occur. So for fish analysis, you could use both mitotic and meiotic stages of cell division. You could use any of these. So very quickly, I go over the concept of fish, how exactly we do fish analysis. Like I said, qPCR technique is pretty straightforward, where you get the quantification of gene copy numbers. In fish, like I said, you could have a mitotic phase chromosome. Essentially, during mitosis, we prefer metaphase chromosomes for fish analysis. Metaphase, you have a nicely condensed form of chromosomes which are visible clearly under a microscope. Or if you choose to go for meiotic stages of cell division, you could go for Pachytene stage, where the chromosomes are very elongated and you get a very high resolution fish maps when you use Pachytene stage chromosomes. So in terms of the technique, how exactly we do fish is, you need, for fish analysis, you need a probe for the gene of interest. Again, I'm taking the example as EPSPS gene as an example here. You prepare a probe of EPSPS gene. So in wheat species, you can get the EPSPS gene sequence, either if it is already available in the database, or you need to have a known sequence of the EPSPS gene, and then you use what you call a Nick translation procedure. Thereby, you have the gene of interest is amplified, and also you use the fluorescent probes attached to the gene of interest. And next step in this process is denature, where the two complementary sequences of this probe get separated. You have a single stranded gene sequence of PPSPS here in this case, attached with fluorescent probes. And like I said, you will have your mitotic or meiotic stages prepared on a microscopic slide. And then that slide also will undergo a step called denature, and you will have the double-stranded DNA denatured to single-stranded DNA. And now you have two single-stranded DNA. What we do is this probe, which is single-stranded fluorescently labeled, will be hybridized onto the microscope slide, where we have either mitotic or meiotic stage of chromosomes. And then the next step is called hybridization. Here we let these two single strand DNA with the complementary sequence get hybridized. And then because of fluorescent probes attached to the probe, you could observe these signals under a fluorescent microscope, and then locate where the hybridization is occurring on the chromosome. This is in brief how we do the fish analysis to determine the gene amplification. So I'm going to now talk about some case studies where we have done EPSPS mapping using fish technique. The first one was what we did was in Kochia. It's a problem weed in North American Great Plains. Here is a map of North American Great Plains, starting here in the US, down south in Texas, all the way passing North Dakota, Montana, and then in Canada you have Alberta, Saskatchewan, and also some parts of Manitoba, showing the presence of this weed, Kochia scoparia. It's a very driver weed in this part of the US. Again, the map here shows the presence of kochia in these regions. I think in all of these states or provinces in Canada, there are reports of glyphosate resistance evolution in kochia. So we started looking at fish mapping of EPSPS gene in Kochia scoparia in 2013. One of my students worked on this project as well. Basically, we found the Kochia plants that are resistant to glyphosate have up to 12 EPSPS copies, but the minimum number of EPSPS copies required for a plant to survive glyphosate application in Kochia is 3 and above. So we have seen a plants, these are individual resistant plants showing a different copy number of EPSPS gene. So then we used the mitotic stages of chromosomes of glyphosate susceptible and glyphosate resistant Kochia plants and used EPSPS gene as a probe and hybridized the probe onto these chromosomes. If you see in case of glyphosate susceptible chromosomes, again, Kochia is a diploid plant with chromosome number 18, and you have in a diploid plant 2 homologous chromosomes corresponding with the same composition of the genes. So if you see, these two are the homologous chromosomes and the susceptible plant, and you see the red color here indicate the EPSPS gene signal, and these two homologs show the EPSPS signals not very strong, like a faint signals. At more closely, if you look at it, they are located at telomere region of the chromosome. Whereas in resistant plants, again, you see the signals on 2 homologous chromosomes, again at the telomere region. But if you compare the signal intensity between the resistant plant and the susceptible plant, clearly the resistant plants are showing stronger signals of EPSPS gene hybridization. So after looking at these results, we kind of had an idea that the gene amplification is more occurring only at the local or native locus, and the native locus is located at the telomere. Then we did what called a high resolution fiber fish analysis. Again, like I mentioned earlier, here each DNA is stretched and then you use the probe to hybridize. So here what the cursor I'm showing, each line here represents a single DNA fragment. So we stretched several DNA fragments and then hybridized with EPSPS probe. So here when we prepared a probe, we did a double colored probe. Part of the gene sequence has red color and the other part has a green color. So you can see clearly the copies, EPSPS copies, have amplified or hybridized on the DNA in a tandem arrangement. So you could see clearly these copies are arranged in tandem, and more importantly, like I said, we had a double colored probe prepared. So when we looked at the signals here on these DNA fragments, in many or majority of these signals have a red color followed by the green, so suggesting that they are all in the same sequence, whereas at one particular location we have the green color followed by the red, exactly an inverted uh, sequence seen at one location. So basically, this inverted region sometimes could be the origin of gene duplication. Basically, the first event of unequal crossover we believe must have occurred here, and then thereby the number of copies may have increased subsequently. I'm going to talk about a model where we suggest how this initial duplication may have occurred in a minute. But bottom line is this inverted region on this EPSPS on this DNA suggests that it could be the origin of the duplication. So based on our results, what we predict or what we suggest in COSIA is that initial event of gene duplication is as a result of unequal crossover, basically misalignment of two homologous chromosomes. And then we see, because of unequal crossover, a duplicated copy occurring and a deletion. And this will be occurring even before any glyphosate selection occurred on this kochia plant. But then once we have repeated use of glyphosate, what happens is by each meiotic event, you see an increase in EPSPS copy number, and thereby you see more copies in the subsequent resistant generations of resistant plants, and eventually you see evolution of glyphosate resistance. So this is what is the basis for gene duplication. We believe in kochia or Basia scoparia. In actually we worked with populations from Kansas, but we believe it's probably the similar mechanism in other populations as well. So basically what we did was, after we got the first case of glyphosate resistant documented in kochia in Kansas in 2007, and we had about 9 EPSPS copies in the resistant plant, which survived about 1.7 kg of glyphosate. As you know, the field recommended dose of glyphosate in US at least is about 840 or 50 grams of active ingredient in depending on the crop you are using. And then we went to the same location and got the glyphosate resistant seed collected in 2010 and also in 2012. So we have seen an increase in copy number in the populations that were collected in subsequent years. And the increase in copy number also correlated with the increase in glyphosate resistance. So here a plant that was collected in 2012 had more EPSPS copies, and this plant could survive up to 5.2 kg of glyphosate. Essentially, the bottom line or the take-home message here is, with every glyphosate event, the resistant plant is showing increase in copy numbers and thereby increase in selection as well. So this again is attributed to an equal crossover resulting in increased copy number by each event of glyphosate selection in kochia. So that is the story about kochia plants that are resistant to glyphosate. And then we also investigated the origin of EPSPS gene amplification in glyphosate resistant common water hemp, that is Amaranthus tuberculatus. So throughout the Midwest, you are not surprised to see plants with showing here. I have a soybean field. Soybean field with glyphosate resistant common water hemp infested. So these are the common fields you see where you have common water hemp as a problem weed. So here are some states where glyphosate resistant common water hemp has been reported in the US. And we worked with a population of glyphosate resistant common water hemp from Kansas, and we have done some fish mapping on in this population just to see what is the origin of EPSPS gene duplication in this common water hemp population. So in fact, this is one of my past students' project, Andrew Dillon's project. He was a master's student. So what he did was he had 3 different collection of common water hemp plants, and he has grouped them into low glyphosate resistant plant that had a copy number of EPSPS from anywhere 3 to 5, they are grouped as low copy number glyphosate resistant plants, and then we group them as medium copy number MGR plants, which have up to like 8 copies, anywhere from 4 up to 8 copies. And then we have another group, highly resistant highly resistant plants to glyphosate, and where we have copy numbers up to 16 as well. And again, here also similar to kochia, we have EPSPS copy number correlated with EPSPS gene expression as well. Then when we performed fish analysis in glyphosate resistant these 3 groups of plants, here on the right side, this panel shows the prophase stage of mitotic cell division, and on the other side is the metaphase stage of chromosomes of common water hemp. So the top panel is the glyphosate susceptible plants. Common water hemp is diploid with chromosome number 32, and here, similar to kochia plants, you have the hybridization signal seen on 2 homologous chromosomes, very faint signals of the susceptible plant. And then when we looked at the fish signals on glyphosate resistant plants containing 4 EPSPS copies, again we have seen signals on 2 homologs, slightly brighter than the sensitive plant. In plants that had 8 EPSPS copies, this data came from qPCR analysis, and you see again the signal intensity is brighter than those that had 4 copies. So this is all really correlated with the copy number. The signal intensity is higher as copy number increased. And then when we did fish analysis with a plant that had 17 EPSPS copies, so what we saw was 2 homologous chromosomes, like in the previous cases, showed hybridization signals which are strong. But additionally, here it's shown with an arrow here. Additionally, we had seen one more chromosome showing the EPSPS hybridization signals. Interestingly, we could not find a homolog for that. When we counted the number of chromosomes, we had 33 chromosomes, and we could not see any homolog for this chromosome showing the EPSPS copies, suggesting that it could be an aneuploid with 32 plus 1 chromosome. And there were some theories, maybe this chromosome came because of interspecific hybridization. So it's very common in nature when you have interspecific hybridization, there is a possibility of aneuploidy resulting. So we thought maybe this is a cross between related species to common water hemp, which obviously we tested at that time a possibility of any crossing occurring with Palmer amaranth, but in our work we ruled out it is not because of interspecific hybridization. So after this work, we were very interested to see what is the origin of that extra chromosome. Basically, here in this work, what we found was that the EPSPS copies are located on 2 homologous chromosomes. Essentially, the location of these hybridization signals also is important. Here, if you see closely, the hybridization signal is more towards centromere or pericentromeric region. Unlike in kochia, where I showed the copies are located closer to the telomere, here we see pericentromic localization of EPSPS copies, and we have also seen an aneuploidy kind of situation in plants that had high copy number. So subsequent work, what we looked at was the origin of that extra chromosome carrying the EPSPS gene. So again, we selected some glyphosate resistant plant and repeated the FISH analysis, here again you see clearly that the signals are present on 2 homologs and additionally another chromosome showing signal. This is basically a plant that had more high copy number. And when we did subsequent analyses using some telomere specific probes, these green signals here on the metaphase chromosome are the telomere specific signal, and the red ones are the EPSPS signals. So if you see in this spread, 32 chromosomes plus 1, the telomere signals are hybridized on all the chromosomes, including the 2 homologs that contain the native loci of the EPSPS genes amplified. And additionally, we have this extra chromosome which did not show any telomere specific signals, suggesting that this chromosome doesn't have telomere. And we also confirm that this chromosome is indeed a ring chromosome showing the hybridization of these EPSPS signals. And more importantly, we also performed a FISH analysis using, these are like a euchromatin specific probe, because chromosomes are rich at the euchromatin region. So again, when we look at the hybridization signals, except this extra chromosome, all other chromosomes showed euchromatin specific signals. Basically, the bottom line here is the extra chromosome actually that we saw in the previous research is a ring chromosome. It doesn't have any telomeres, it has free ends, and it's composed of heterochromatin, lack of euchromatin region, and we termed this as extracircular chromosome carrying EPSPS copies. So basically, we see an extra chromosome formed in plants that had a high EPSPS copy number in common water hemp. Then we also looked at the transmission of this EPSPS or extra chromosome into the next generation. We crossed a glyphosate sensitive plant with the plant that had high copies and an extra chromosome. We generated several F1 plants, and actually we had several plants showing the presence of ECCA's extra chromosome carrying the EPSPS copies. And then what we did was we selected a couple of those plants and did FISH analysis on this. Like it's the four panels shown here all came from a single root tip of these selected plants. So when we did FISH analysis, again using the telomere specific probes and EPSPS gene, in the next generation, what we have seen was these extra chromosome is present. Additionally, we have seen some other EPSPS chromosome signals on other chromosomes, and also some secondary extra chromosomes getting formed showing the EPSPS signals. So this is kind of unique result. We didn't expect that the secondary ECCAs are formed once we make a cross between the high chromosome number plants, high copy number plants with the sensitive plant. So based on these results, basically what we believe is the extra chromosome can be transmitted to the offsprings, and the offsprings can also form secondary ECCA's structures. So based on these results, we developed a model model for origin of EPSPS duplication in common water hemp. Basically, it could be as a result of breakage fusion bridge concept. I'm sure in your again biology class, some of you may have studied about this phenomenon. Basically, you can have a chromatin breakage occurring in the native locus where the original EPSPS gene is located, and then those broken segments of the chromosome can form a ring structure, And then because of sister chromatid exchange, you will see secondary ECCA is formed, and then sometimes the secondary ECCAs can get integrated back into a different chromosome at different location, along with the copies of the gene that it carries from the original location of the chromosome. So this is what we believe the probably the origin of amplification of EPSPS gene in common water hemp. So I'll move on to the more exciting part of this talk, which is the EPSPS amplification in Palmer amaranth. This is a very different story when we looked at, again, molecular cytogenetic maps of glyphosate-resistant Palmer amaranth. So again, glyphosate resistance in Palmer amaranth is a huge problem in many states in the US. As you can see in this graph, in this map, 29 states have reported presence of glyphosate resistant Palmer amaranth in the US. And this is one of the fields in Kansas, soybean fields infested with glyphosate resistant Palmer amaranth. I got this picture from my colleague, Dr. Dallas Peterson. It's a beautiful picture just to show the significance of this significance of this problem in soybean. So here in Palmer amaranth, what we found was when we performed fish analysis, something really exciting. I'm going to go over those details in a minute, but just a background on this, as you all or some of you may be aware that the first case of gene amplification based resistance to glyphosate was reported in Palmer amaranth. Like I said, Gaines et al. Published this work in 2010 in PNAS. After that, actually, glyphosate resistance in Palmer amaranth was first documented in Kansas only in 2012. So here we have the plants from Kansas. We looked at the copy number in this glyphosate-resistant Palmer amaranth plant from Kansas. We have seen plants showing up to even 80 or 100 DPSPS copies, similar to what was seen in the population that Gaines et al. Worked that came from Georgia. So we did metaphase fish analysis in glyphosate susceptible and resistant Palmer amaranth plants. Again, in susceptible plants, you can see faint signals on 2 homologous chromosomes, similar to other cases. But again, here also, the location of these copies is similar to water hemp. It's more close to the centromere region. Whereas in glyphosate-resistant plant that had high copies, you could see the hybridization signals on several chromosomes, similar to what was seen by Gaines et al. We have seen the distribution of these copies throughout the genome. Then here is a prophase stage of chromosome or prophase stage of cell division. When we hybridized, when we used EPSPS probes to hybridize on this prophase stage of the chromosomes, you could see the hybridization signal occurring on all over the genome. But what was intriguing was we have seen a couple of signals showed away from this genome area inside the nucleus. So we have seen 2 strong signals showing outside this chromatin region. So we got intrigued, oh, what's going on here? Why we do see these signals? Then again, the take-home message from this slide is that these copies are randomly distributed throughout the genome. So later on, Dr. Bill Molin and Chris Saski's group from Clemson and USDA, they have reported the more kind of a more kind of important things about the EPSPS gene in Palmer amaranth, especially in terms of gene sequencing information. So they have sequenced the EPSPS gene and also the genes surrounding this EPSPS gene. They named this as EPSPS gene cassette. They have found about 297 kb big fragment when they got the sequences using the back libraries performed. And what they have reported that this cassette includes a number of other genes that are involved in stress response in plants, and also they found some helitrons, and more importantly they have found some autonomous replicating sequences in this region and some inverted and tandem clusters. This information was really important for what we wanted to do subsequently with Palmer amaranth work. So after this publication, Dr. Chris Askey's group also developed more bags. Like they got about 6 bag libraries, 6 bags prepared, which initially when they reported it was about 200 kb, but they got about 400 kb big 400 kb length containing the EPSPS gene. So we were fortunate that they were able to share these bags with us, because if you have bags available, then you could do high resolution fish mapping. So we got those bags from them, and we prepared the bag probes with the different colors, like in a kind of alternate order, like red color followed by green. So we use these back libraries and prepared the probe to perform fiber fish analysis. So after we got those back sequences, so we did the fiber fish analysis using the stretched DNA from glyphosate resistant Palmer amaranth. So basically this was a kind of eureka moment for us. So when we did this fiber fish analysis, like I said, the bags kind of showing the alternate colors here, green and red. So we have seen several fragments in circular form. That is the one got our attention, because the circular structure also contained the EPSPS gene. Basically, this is slightly different from what I mentioned about circular chromosome in common water hemp, which is a complete segment of a chromosome. Whereas in Palmer amaranth, it is just a DNA fragment which is in circular shape containing the EPSPS gene. So these circular molecules, actually these, because they have some autonomous replication unit, they are able to multiply on their own, and that's why you see massive amplification of EPSPS copies in in Palmer amaranth plants. So basically in Palmer amaranth, you have extra chromosomal DNA, which is in circular shape carrying the EPSPS gene. In addition to that, you have other genes also getting amplified in this. So we also performed Packitine fish. You remember in the beginning I mentioned that you could also do Packitine fish analysis in meiotic cell division stage. So we have done this Packitine fish analysis and looked at the hybridization of EPSPS probe on these Packitine chromosomes. If you closely see, these green structures are the hybridization signals from that bags we got. So if you see closely, all these hybridization signals are just tethered or attached to the chromatin here rather than getting integrated into the chromosome. Basically, these ECC DNA, we call them as like a extracircular DNA molecules. They are just tethered to the chromosomes here. They don't appear to have gotten integrated into the genome, but the mechanism by which they are tethered to this chromatin is still not clear, although some findings are coming out more recently. So another interesting thing we found in Palmer amaranth is that if you look at, this is a prophase stage of cell division from a single root tip of a glyphosate resistant Palmer amaranth plant. You could see the signal intensity variation among these prophase stage of chromosomes. So basically, there is a huge variation. Some cells have very bright signals, some have hardly any signals, some have very faint signals. Basically, what it suggests is within the same plant, within the same tissue, there is a variation in number of EPSPS copies or the ECCDNA present in each cell of these glyphosate resistant plants. So we have also done earlier some work looking at the variation in copy number of these glyphosate resistant plants. Here we have three plants named GR1, GR2 and GR3. So these three different glyphosate resistant plants of Palmer amaranth, we collected the leaf tissue from different positions on these plants, like a primary branch, tertiary branch, secondary branch. And what we found was there is a huge variation in copy number depending on where you are collecting this tissue. So this data pretty much corroborates with what we see in fish analysis. Like I said, there is a somatic cell variation in copy number that actually reflects in the whole plant analysis of copy number as well. So basically, you see such soma cell variation in copy number. So which suggests that these copies are not stable in the plant. And the other reason we believe the copies are not stable yet in the plant, because like I mentioned, the ECCDNA or the circular DNA carrying EPSPS gene does not seem to be integrated into the genome of Palmer amaranth. They are just existing in the genome, just attached to this chromatin by some mechanism. They have not gotten integrated into the chromosome. Integration into the genome is really important for long-term stability of these EPSPS copies. So at least at this time, maybe eventually under selection, eventually these copies may get integrated. But so far we don't have that evidence that they got integrated into the chromosomes yet. So we have some other research going on in the lab, especially looking at gene amplification based herbicide resistance using molecular cytogenetic analysis. We are working with glyphosate resistance in Lolium multiflorum, Italian ryegrass, Amaranthus spinosus, and other species as well. And more recently, we also worked with ACCA's gene amplification in large crabgrass as well. Those are the ongoing research in regards to molecular cytogenetics work in the lab. So with that, I am going to just summarize my seminar today. Basically, the application of molecular cytogenetics can help in looking at the origin of gene amplification based resistance, how exactly the initial events occur before you see the evolution of resistance. And it's one of the novel mechanisms of resistant herbicides so far, especially for glyphosate, like I presented for common water hemp or palmeri, Amaranthus palmeri examples. And as I said, these extra chromosomes carrying EPSPS gene seem to be still unstable in the genome. So because of this, we hypothesize there is a possibility for reversal of resistance if we take off glyphosate selection. Maybe these molecules that are unstable may dissipate in the event if we take off the glyphosate selection. Maybe can we make these plants susceptible again? That is something, this hypothesis is something we are testing in our lab now. We don't have any conclusive data yet. Also, like I said, especially in Palmer amaranth, we have seen along with EPSPS gene, some other genes getting amplified. Those can have some adaptive advantage to the organism. That's why they may be able to withstand other stressful environmental conditions as well. So with that, I would like to thank my collaborators. This is the group from our university in the Department of Plant Pathology. This is Dr. Dal Hoku. He is an expert in fish work. He is, I would say, some handful of people around the globe who have this skill set of working with or developing fish-based maps, and Dr. Burnfree and Dr. Bikram Gill, they are all the pioneers of fish techniques. They have developed several types of fish mapping. My past student Karthik helped us with Palmer amaranth work, and Dr. Bill Merlin from USDA-ARS and Chris Saski from Clemson University, also the collaborators on Palmer amaranth project, and my group for their help and support as always. And also here is funding sources for my research. With that, I'll take questions. I took some extra time, Louise. Sorry, I think I went 5 minutes over.
No problem.
Can you hear
that was
me?
Very good. Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Sorry.
Can you hear me now? All right.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Read the questions, or you can read it.
I just opened the window. I think I'm reading. If the first question, what is the other target site with potential to have also gene amplification? Right, that's the first question. Yeah. So far, I said we got more recently ACCS gene target getting amplified. So at this time, I would say it's not confined to one particular target. Apparently, we just have to test for other cases also. Maybe it's possible for other target sites also. In our opinion, or in our analysis, what we believe is the location of native gene on the chromosome is also important for the initial duplication event. So once we understand the location of, for example, ALS gene in a susceptible biotype of maybe Palmer amaranth or whatever, if we look at that in the wild type, which is a susceptible type, maybe we could make some assumptions, either this location make these plants prone to amplification-based resistance or not. Again, we have only 2 reports so far for glyphosate, EPSPS target and ACCS target. So I'm looking at the next question. There is any effect of increased copy number of EPSPS on plant fitness? Oh, this is a good question. And actually we have got some good work done. But basically, if I remember correctly, for Palmer amaranth, there was no fitness penalty whatsoever with this such massive amplification of EPSPS gene. This was reported from populations from US and also other places as well. So it doesn't seem to have any fitness penalty, but again, fitness assessment of fitness is very challenging. You need really good population to work with. Once you develop a strong genetic background to assess the fitness, then if you perform those studies, then that will give you an exact effect of these amplified copies on fitness of the plant. Now moving on to next question. have you ever used fish technique to hybridize metabolic genes? Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, we are looking at the this aspect also, but in order for us to do fish work on metabolic resistance, you need to have a clear sequence for specific CYP. You know, CYPs or GSTs are a huge family of genes. So, for example, I'll tell you in Palmer amaranth, we know atrazine resistance is mediated by GSTs, but we still do not know exactly what GST or which GST gene is involved in metabolizing atrazine in plants. So once we have the exact sequence of GST gene conferring resistance, then we could do the fish analysis. So we are not there yet, although we are trying to dig into this some of specific genes. We are not there yet to do fish analysis to look at the metabolic resistance in either weeds, or even you could try this in crops as well, because crops, for example, corn metabolizes atrazine, again the same mechanism via GST conjugation. So we haven't tested that yet. And the other question, which method would be the best to study gene amplification in polyploid species? That's a good question. So again, Dr. Gill, I just mentioned about their lab. They work with wheat, which is a polyploid. They have done they have developed several physical maps in wheat for different genes actually, and one of them I happened to read their papers happened to be ACCS gene also. So they have used single copy fish. We call what I showed in metaphase chromosomes. Technically, they are called single copy fish, and then you have fiber fish and packeting fish. So I've seen their publications with single copy fish just to show the if they have any difference in different genome. You know, in wheat you have got A, B, C, D, three different genome, hexaploid, which is an hexaploid. So they just used single copy fish, but again in wheat species we do have polyploids. We haven't tested. I believe single copy fish should work, because again, you know, the size of chromosome also matters. If you see a fish, or sorry, a chromosome spread of wheat or even some cultivated species, you see their chromosomes are much larger, whereas weeds, our Palmer amaranth or common water hemp or kochia, you can see kochia, at least kochia chromosomes are much bigger than Palmer amaranth or water hemp. The chromosomes are really, really tiny. So it gets really tricky to see clear hybridization signals if you have a really small chromosome size. So it depends on which polyploid species we are talking about. If they have got larger chromosomes, maybe single copy fish might help to see the gene amplification in those species. So I have more questions here. The ECC-DNA in Palmer amaranth are not integrated in genome. Is that why this species needs a massive number of copies to be resistant compared to kochia and water hemp? That's a good question. So we believe before ECC-DNA forms in Palmer amaranth, there is some level of amplification occurring in the native locus. So basically in susceptibles where we assume they have one copy or on two homologs, obviously it's susceptible, but if you see some level of amplification occurring at native locus, then you, again, if you look in the literature for Palmer amaranth, in Palmer amaranth, you need at least 30 EPSPS copies for the plant to be resistant to glyphosate. So if you have 30 copies or maybe 40 copies in the native locus, that could be still resistant. But beyond that, once the ECCDNA mediated resistance is started, then it is just a massive amplification. So this could be the reason why we see more copies needed for glyphosate resistance in Palmer amaranth. Again, kochia and water hemp are pretty similar. Again, we also have cases in water hemp where we have seen extra chromosome with multiple copies of EPSPS gene also. So next question, on the Palmer amaranth, do the copy number change as plant grows? Related to different copy number in the primary branch versus tertiary branch. Okay, that's a good question. I don't believe so because the somatic cell variation slide I showed you, that came from a very, very young plant. We took the root tips. Usually mitotic stage, for mitotic stages, we take root tips from seedling stage of the plant. Even in that, at that stage, we have seen a massive number of EPSPS gene. So it doesn't appear to be related to the growth or the growth stage of the plant, but because the somatic variation can occur at any stage of the plant growth, you just see this massive variation in copy number. And then the last one, if EPSPS gene is the same cassette as the other genes related to stress, does it explain the crosstalk of stress and glyphosate response? Okay. Related to the stress, one thing we know for sure is when Dr. Merlin's group did an analysis of origin of EPSPS gene in glyphosate-resistant Palmer amaranth collected from different locations in the US. I'm also part of that work. What was found was, it seems like the EPSPS amplification occurred in Georgia first and spread across the US. It seems like it has a same origin or the single origin and spread across the US. That means the cassette they have sequenced containing the stress-related genes may also be present in the EPSPS cassette that was found in glyphosate-resistant Palmer amaranth in Kansas or other locations. So that's what we believe. All right. Is this the next question? What determines the number of EPSPS copies in the ring chromosome in water hemp? You don't understand the question. What determines the number of copies? Oh, I really don't understand the question. What does it mean by that? If I understand correctly, it's basically what we are suggesting in common water hemp is the pericentromic location of EPSPS copies in the native locus and subsequent divisions in the native locus resulting in increased copy numbers at the pericentromic region where you see high level of recombination. So that's the region where you may have had this breakage of chromosomal segment, and then you have that broken chromosome containing the EPSPS gene forming the circular chromosome, and then subsequently you have secondary circular chromosomes carrying EPSPS gene getting formed because of, like I said, sister chromatid exchange and other events. I don't know if I answered that question, Ednaldo. You can ask me specifically again. I'll try to answer. So their question is why the choice of normalizer to equate EPSPS gene amplification isn't standard to compare the wheat population. I have seen research working with Cinnamyl CO reductase and other researchers using the acetolactase synthase. This could change the real EPS copy. Okay, I think you are asking about using the reference gene to determine the EPSPS copies. Yeah, that's a good question. So in our lab also we tried different reference genes to make sure we are comparing the PSPS copies with the correct reference gene. So to answer your question, we have done some analysis using ALS as a reference gene, as well as we used other like actin or tubulin, and we have seen, especially with the ALS or tubulin, there is no change in number of copies we determined, EPS copies we determined. Although we haven't used the CCR gene as a reference, but we haven't seen a big difference when we used either ALS or beta tubulin as our reference. Okay, did I miss any other question, Luis?
No, you answer all the questions, and I think all the questions is answered. Mitila, thank you very much for your talk. It was very, very interesting. We have several things to think about now, and I really appreciate you to sharing your knowledge on that, and it was excellent. Thank you, Mitila, for your willingness to do that.
Oh, no problem. I really enjoyed doing this. Thank you for the opportunity. Again, I had my email in the very first slide. If anyone has any question at a later stage, feel free to email me. I'll try to answer as much as possible.
All right. Thank you very much. Take care. Be safe.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.